as a cost evangelist for like the last 4 or 5 years, when I talked about that, it always being bottom of the pile, DevOps are about the most expensive resource a company can have. And the idea that you want them to save a few dollars here and a few dollars there, like you say, doesn't make any sense.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 185. What is cost optimization in AWS? Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. Victor, recently I was watching the news and I saw that Paris blacked out the whole city at night. It was so strange to see the Eiffel Tower completely dark.
Okay. It's strange, yeah? I thought that there was something else coming out.
No, it's just strange because, it seems like there's this energy crisis, which all comes down to money. I mean, it goes well beyond that.
I think that right now, money, no matter how much money you have, probably you cannot buy all the energy you need on this continent. But it's still about money, yes. I think because we need it. Is that why we're talking about it?
Well, we need it, but usually the companies that we work for need it as well in order to operate. And we've talked a lot in the past about FinOps. Not necessarily a lot, but we've talked about it some in the past. And today we have Ganesh on from GlobalDots. Ganesh, how you doing, man?
Hey, good to see you both.
Right now, the U.S. is probably headed towards, and you can argue, could already be in a recession. The whole world is trying to clamp down on money. Ganesh, what do you think? Are people really trying to save money? Or are they still trying to burn as much cash as possible from the VCs?
Without a doubt in the world, the number one thing that people want to do is save money on their estates. A small bit of background as to who I am and what I do. We work for a company that's innovation hunting, constantly looking for new technologies that are out there and then bringing those to market. And I would say in the last 5 years, been evangelizing on cost optimization, and then it got a name, and now they call it FinOps. So we're sort of talking to people about it before it had a name. But yeah, appetite is as high as I've ever seen it, basically.
Where do people usually start when they're trying to save a few pennies?
We're assuming that anybody listening to this podcast is in a hyperscaler of some description, and we all know that the most common one is Amazon. So let's just start with Amazon and assume that the features that Amazon do, the other hyperscalers will eventually have to copy, because that's how these things go. I want to get into some really cool things that are happening now that's bleeding edge, but I don't want to lose anybody on the way. So I'm going to start with some basics I think probably most people will know. And if you start listening and you're thinking, yeah, I know that, don't worry, it's getting somewhere more interesting, but I want to make sure we take everyone on the journey. The worst thing you can do with your AWS estate is pay on demand. So I think we all know what that means, but basically, or replace AWS with any hyperscaler, but let's just say your cloud is pay on demand. And that means you're just paying the list price and you're paying full price for that. Way back when the hyperscalers first started, there was this dream of auto scaling, which meant, much like Paris's lights on the Eiffel Tower, when you didn't need them, you could turn them off. Put your resources on, scale them up during the day when lots of people are hitting your e-commerce site, scale it down at night when you don't need it, and run it as a bare minimum. And this was seen as like a dark art because you could suddenly save all these costs and tune it and turn it off at night. Some companies still haven't done that, but that's like sort of, basics 101. On top of that, you've now got unbelievable myriad ways to get discounts from the cloud provider which you can mix and match and put them together. This is where it immediately falls over because there's so many different ways to do it, and it is mildly to sort of moderately complicated, and nobody wants to do it. It's the worst job. It's, the DevOps guy, if you want to ask a DevOps guy to save money, it's the least sexy part of a stack. People want to be using really fancy Lambda functions to do this and the latest functions in Kubernetes and this and that and the other. Can we save some money now? Everyone sort of is like a sulky teenager. They don't want to do this stuff. And it falls between a hinterland of financial people knowing that they want to save money, and then the DevOps guys sort of either not knowing, not caring, it's not really a responsibility. The thing that comes last is probably cost saving because features, and you've always got to keep pace with the competition, and you need to do this, and then security is an issue, and this, and this, and this, and then somehow it's always not as important as all the other things that are going on. First of all, there's this sort of political battle in order to get people to pay attention, but I think we're now past that because the technologies have arrived that allow the best cost saving, and now that we are arguably going to be in some sort of economic depression across most of the Western world, touch wood, we won't, but I think we will. People will be looking to harness these other technologies.
The part from the very beginning is very interesting to me. You said that there are dozens of ways, infinite number of ways to save money on, let's say, Amazon, right? And nobody knows how to do it. So would it be fair to say that Amazon, it's almost kind of conflicting, right? Amazon, obviously, by offering you ways to save money, wants you to kind of go for those things. But on the other hand, it's too complicated. So Amazon doesn't want you to go for those things. Kind of, isn't that a bit conflicting that there is no easy way to save, yet there is a way to save? Kind of, why does Amazon do that? I mean, AWS.
There's two aspects to this. So I'm going to start with the first sort of iteration of cost saving that arrived. So the main one that you're able to use inside an environment, or the biggest cost saving, would be spot instances. For those who don't know, a spot instance is a resource that you can use, which is a greatly reduced price, sometimes up to 90% less than the cost of a VM if you took it on demand, with a caveat that Amazon can take that back within 2 minutes. So they send you a little piece of metadata that says, in 2 minutes, we want to take this back. And that's the end of it. Other people then went out and built platforms so that you could harness the power of spot instances and still have 100% uptime on your auto-scaling groups and your Elastic container clusters, whereby you know you need 100% uptime, and you wouldn't be able to use these volatile spot instances. If you have an orchestration platform on top of that, it means you can start saving money because you can use the very allegedly unstable spot instances and have your platform run on top of that. We're talking about sort of 5 years old technology here when we're talking about this, maybe even longer than that. Whole companies sprung out of that, saving people, even after the charge of the software, talking about 60 to 70% of the cost of their cluster. Amazon realized that people could interact with their platform, so then brought the features in-house. So Amazon, can't have any money disappearing anywhere else, so they have to bring the features in. I don't think Amazon would have brought those features in if there wasn't a third party doing it first. So that's one aspect, is that people are innovating outside of Amazon or outside of a cloud, So it forces them to innovate internally because they're losing any thread of pennies. The second part of that is particularly relating to spot instances, because they're volatile and changing more frequently and swapping in and out. If you're building a cluster on top of those, let's say, for example, that in you're building out a cluster and you need 4 CPUs and 4 gig of RAM. Also, 6 gig and 6 RAM is going to be fine. And any number higher than that, you don't specifically need this one kind of resource, which is nice for Amazon because it means that when they're running out of resources, and they do run out of resources, anybody who's tried to run a production workload on Amazon will know at some point, you go to run an instance and it just says, sorry, no instance is available. But if everybody's running on a more fluid and volatile infrastructure, it means they can, if somebody really wants to pay the on-demand price, they'll take that away and it can be replaced by a different spot instance. So it allows their platform to be a lot more elastic. So there's the elasticity side of it, and there's the fact that the third parties are forcing them to innovate on the side.
So it's like going to a restaurant and because you have a great discount, but the only problem is that you get to eat only the leftovers from those who pay the full price, right?
Well, it's a bit like that. It's actually probably more like you've got a coupon to use a restaurant for a discount price, but then if someone's willing to pay full price, they just kick you out of the restaurant, period. But this technology is, spot instances are nothing new. And probably anybody who's into the DevOps world are kind of like, yeah, we know about that. And the technology that was built around that has since been available on GitHub and various other ways. And now it's just straight out of the AWS platform. So when you're choosing to run an auto scaling group, you can literally choose to run it on spot instances. This is a kind of a slow pace or slow to where we are today. The reason I mention them first is because that's where the maximum savings are. If you want to get the best possible savings for your Kubernetes cluster or for any resource, the spot instances are the way to go. Due to their volatility, they're not right for everything. Certain things they need to remain on, databases, certain memory clusters, Redis, things like that. Of this other plethora of savings that are available, and I'll start with one which we can discard for most people. So you have Enterprise Discount Program. This is a way that you can get discount across your whole workload, your compute workload, but you have to be spending about $1 million a year before you even qualify for it. For most people, that's not really a good thing because you have to be pretty big to be spending $1 million a year. And generally, across the board, it saves you about 9%. Talking about spot instances, they can save you 80 to 90% on the workload. Enterprise discount plan is about 9%. Pretty much discard that as a great idea, but that's something that is available to very large customers.
Unless you go and say and show the paper from Azure and say, hey, they're giving me this price. Then you get 10%, not 9%.
Then you get 10%. I think depends how good you are at politics, sales, and bluffing. But yeah, I'm very sure that people have got very aggressive enterprise discount plans from AWS. No question about it.
You say that number one is spot instances. I'm still convinced that the number one saving is shut it down. Don't treat your AWS as if it's on-prem, right? So I would move spot instances on the second place, Karo.
100% agree. If it doesn't need to be on, then you got to turn that thing off. If you need to run it, spot instances, enterprise discount plans, we can discard those unless you're a very large customer.
There's also a program, right, for startups, and that can be considerable amount of money, right? That you get, I don't know, 100K or something like that, just so that you become a future customer, right? When your business grows.
Exactly that. All the hyperscalers will offer you that. And if you build yourself a really nice CI/CD platform in Terraform that is 100% platform agnostic, which is something like a dreamland to be fully platform agnostic, then you can take those free credits and then you can recycle them in each hyperscaler. Not true FinOps really, because you're just taking advantage of the fact that they want to get you hooked on their drugs. This is like a dealer giving the first one for free and then jacking up the price. True nature of FinOps isn't just being able to take a free discount from Amazon at the start point, although that obviously should be part of it. The spot instances we talked about, enterprise discount plan we talked about, and then there's two other main ways of saving money, or two main forms of FinOps. I would describe them as financially based rather than operationally based. These are savings plans and reserved instances. So with savings plans, you basically look at how much compute power you're using across the board, and you say to Amazon, I know that I'm going to be using this many £1,000 worth of compute power every month. Give me a discount based on the fact that I will commit to using that. And they'll give you a discount for that. The downside being that if you don't use that commitment, you still have to pay for what you've reserved as the commitment. And they do that in multiple year formats. So you can choose 1, 2, or 3 year savings plans, with obviously a 3-year savings plan giving you even better savings than a 1-year savings plan. And then you have no upfront, so you don't pay anything upfront. They just give you the discount. Partial upfront, which is kind of a 50-50, where you say, I'll pay for my 1 year's reservation upfront and you get an even better discount. Or then full upfront, so you just pay for the whole year upfront and Amazon will give you the best discount you can. Most companies don't like that. It's not ideal. Most people are on like OPEX, operational expenditure. They don't like capital expenditure. It's horrible and nasty to see a big spike in your spending, and it's just not a nice way that people like to operate generally. So most people tend to go for the no upfront, and it's almost impossible to predict what you're going to be doing in 12 months' time. To do more than a year commitment is pretty crazy. With savings plans, they would argue that you can get up to 72% savings on the on-demand price. The actual reality of that, when you choose a 1 year and you choose no upfront payment, is you get about 20 to 30%. Now, the advantage of that is it's very broad where you can take that savings plan. So your savings plan can count towards things you buy in the Amazon marketplace, as well as compute resources and things like that. So savings plans, highly flexible, but with not great savings, basically. So you sort of get, typically a customer will get about 20 to 30% if they're using a savings plan.
We've had guests on before that say, do you really trust the hyperscaler to give you the best possible discounts?
Short answer, no. They're
giving you the discount. Let's go back to the restaurant coupon example. They're giving you enough to get you in and hope that you stay or that you come back and pay full price again at some point in the future.
Exactly. And the idea that, and it's interesting actually, because specifically for this show, they're always adding different kinds of savings. The one the next one in line to talk about is reserved instances, but they're always scaling out where you can purchase these. And even looking on Amazon's own site, it hides the different places where you can purchase the savings. It doesn't make it obvious for you to find. If they were really serious about saving everybody money, they would just give everybody the discounted price. It's a total myth. It's done to help build some sort of trust or rapport that if you do the right things and it's helping Amazon and this, that, and the other. The only way I can possibly imagine that there is a real need for Amazon to have reserved capacity is that to help them decide what they need to build out in their data center. We know we need to add X kind of machines like this or Y kind of databases like that. But in reality, these are all virtual machines anyway. It's all just infrastructure to them. And I'm sure they have insanely complicated algorithms that tell them what to build out. They don't need customers telling them that we'll need these kind of 5 databases for the next 12 months. If you want to save money, going to Amazon, the people who are charging you, it seems like, insanity to me.
From financial perspective, and I'm ignoring now the features, technical part. Which of the big three makes more sense? From financial perspective.
It makes more sense in terms of where you can save more money, or makes more sense in...
Which one is going to end up cheaper?
I actually think that with all the various tools that are built on top of AWS, it'll end up being the cheapest. And that's the nature of features for hyperscalers. You talk to any startup technology, they always start with AWS because most people are there. Then they'll add GCP and Azure. So the very latest cost optimization technologies are always available for AWS first, so you'll save the most money there.
And without cost saving, are they similarly priced or?
So depends what you want to run on there, really. Most of the time, big data, those kind of things are much cheaper on GCP. It's more friendly towards that. General basics, Kubernetes type workloads are pretty similar between the three. I think Amazon would be a little bit more expensive on that. But if we want to get into a slight side topic about clouds, I mostly see that it's people who come from an enterprise IT infrastructure tend to pick Azure because it's friendly towards all the stuff they've built in the past. and they can recycle their licenses in there. So all the licenses they bought on-prem, some nice man at Microsoft will then turn that into cloud licenses for them, and that's all nice. Amazon was the first one there, so they got most of the features, and then GCP is playing catch up a little bit with the features, but obviously very good with big data because they're the pros in big data, basically.
There is a huge number of, smaller providers. When does it make sense to go with something that is not the big 3 or 4, if you count Alibaba in there, kind of? I mean, can then the price itself, at least for the part of your workload, be motivation to be somewhere else? Because if I look at DigitalOcean, Linode, all those smaller players, the price is just brutally different. Kind of, it's not even a bit cheaper; it's infinitely cheaper, right?
Yep, totally agree. The problem that DevOps have is all these lovely, nice features that they put inside AWS and the other hyperscalers make it sticky. So these nice little functions that join one part of the system to another make it sticky. But for 100% sure, we've worked on migration into AWS with customers, and now we're doing migration out. So AWS out is a business function part of what we do. And the number one is actually ad tech marketing, because they're all custom built platforms. That kind of thing is very easy. If it's just Kubernetes and it's just lots of crunching, absolutely take it away. And particularly with Linode, you also have S3 compatible storage, which is so much cheaper than taking S3 from AWS. Anyone listening, if you have a lot of storage needs, it's not just Linode. Cloudflare also have an offering. Wasabi also have an offering. Lots of people have an offering that's not only is it like S3, it's S3 API compatible. You almost don't have to do anything. It's just a couple of lines of code. And on top of that, if you haven't put a CDN in front of things like your S3 buckets, CloudFront would be the obvious one because it comes with AWS, but you'll get a much, much, much better rate using a CDN that isn't from Amazon. So if you're looking at static images on a website, there's no reason for them to be served from your main stack. They can just be another bucket stored on Linode or DigitalOcean or somewhere else with a free CDN in front. I mean, Cloudflare will even give you a free CDN. So you suddenly go from paying for the egress charge and paying tons for the storage to paying nothing for delivery and paying absolutely minimal for the storage of it. But it's all about what you can compartmentalize. That's a tricky one. You need a solutions architect and someone with a view over the whole system to be able to say, okay, this is too sticky. We can't move this out. That's a cultural problem. And it's something that people like to think is very sexy when they say things like, we want to go multi-cloud. We have to go multi-cloud. We want to be able to spin up anywhere we like. And it's going to be this and it's going to be that. And you can see the technical people are just rolling their eyes in their heads because they're thinking, you have no idea how integrated these systems are. The main database, which we cannot move, remains in the cloud, and the latency between a third-party provider and that will be so horrendous that they have to stay next to each other. So, yeah, lots of complication in there.
Then we have a human part of the cost, right? If I go for, let's say, Linode for this and AWS for that, and I save a bit of money, but one engineer cost me, what, $200K a year? How much do I have to save in order to justify additional people working on something? Humans are still more expensive than AWS, even without a discount, right?
Absolutely. And as a cost evangelist for like the last 4 or 5 years, when I talked about that, it always being bottom of the pile, DevOps are about the most expensive resource a company can have. And the idea that you want them to save a few dollars here and a few dollars there, like you say, doesn't make any sense. In the last 12 to 24 months, FinOps automation has blown up. You had Maxim from Zesty on the show. Very cool technology. I really like what those guys are doing. A slight bit of history on the back of that. Tools prior to this point would give you recommendations. So you could run a tool on your cloud and it would say, we recommend moving from an R4 to an R5. So new generations that come from cloud providers are often cheaper than the existing ones, and you get better performance. So there's no reason not to do that. And it works the same with disk types. And a famous one is Amazon's GP2 and GP3. You can migrate them on the fly. It costs absolutely nothing. Literally, you just need to run a script that says convert all my GP2s to GP3s, and you've saved money on storage in a nutshell. But the recommendation doesn't lead to action. The recommendation leads to somebody who's got a console saying, hey, we need to save all this money in these places. And then a DevOps guy going, listen, I'm way too busy. This is a ridiculous thing you're asking me to do. The latest thing, which is by far the coolest thing, is having automation whereby DevOps aren't needed with reserved instances. So reserved instances are a lot like savings plans, except they work for a specific kind of compute unit. You say, I want a medium size this in this region, and I want it for 1 year. Or you can say it with databases, or you can say it with Elasticsearch and OpenSearch and DynamoDB. That's not sort of publicly known information or very easily found information that you can buy reserved instances for all these types. But now you can. But even that is not enough, because you could look at all of that, but somebody has got to work it out. And if it's not the DevOps guy, it's a finance person. And again, it falls down this rabbit hole of, it's not my job, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do this. With reserved instance automation, we finally got to the point where you can put machine learning on top, connect a third party into your Amazon account, and it will run and find out your steady state workload. And it will look and see, okay, you're running this many EC2s, you're running this many databases, this much OpenSearch, this much whatever. And across the board will say, this is how much you're actually wasting. Let us automate the purchasing of your RIs for you. And an algorithm will go away and do that. The key piece is that there's no engineering. In the old days, if you want to migrate your Kubernetes cluster to run on Spot instances, you have to do a whole thing. You have to run sprints. You have to put it in the CI/CD pipeline. People have to test it, blah, 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 blah. And it gets stuck in the mud, and it doesn't happen. And I know that because we've evangelized about it quite a lot. Some companies are ready for that. Most aren't. With RI automation, you're simply saying, allow a machine learning algorithm to scan what you're using and what you're paying, and it'll automatically purchase the reservations for you. And then the architecture stays the same. You don't have to bother the DevOps guy. You don't have to bother the finance guy. No need for terrible spreadsheets that are trying to predict what you're doing. This is what we're seeing in the last 12 months, that RI automation and FinOps automation generally is taking hold with gusto, let's say.
But all of that is outside of the hyperscalers. Those are the third parties that are doing it to that extent.
So all of that is outside of the hyperscalers. Exactly that. Yeah. Exactly how we saw it with Spot instances. Initially with Spot instances, they were outside the hyperscalers, and you're bringing them in as a third party, trusted account to account, and they were running APIs inside your account for you. And this is exactly what's happening now. I don't doubt that within 12 to 24 months, you'll see that the hyperscalers will do RI automation for you, because they'll see they're losing money out to these third parties, and they'll have to bring the function in-house.
Theoretically, hyperscalers can shut down businesses in a way, right? Amazon tomorrow could say, oh, no more API that you're using for doing this or that. That would save money in a way, right?
Absolutely. With a lot of these tools that run as a third party, you're doing account-to-account permission allowing, and then you're allowing another account to run certain API calls. To an extent, Amazon can't stop that. You can't stop somebody being able to just be a trusted account user of your account, because it would break the whole permissioning system. But they can stop certain things, and a prime example would be savings plans routing. So there used to be a feature where you could purchase savings plans, and if you didn't use them inside your account, you could route them to another account. And then these platforms that do RI automation used to also do savings plans automation. Amazon realized that they were using savings plan routing feature and they stopped it. And they said you can only have a savings plan within an account. And it was specifically done to stop these third-party tools from being able to save the maximum amount of money.
Well, as we've seen over time, Amazon as a company, once they see that there's a hot market, they create their own version of it, just Amazon itself. And what you just said there, AWS decided, oh, wait, we're not going to allow that anymore, good, bad, or indifferent. One of the things that's been said in the past is you never get fired for bringing in IBM. Can you be fired today for bringing in a hyperscaler?
I think absolutely not. You have to go with one of them. And anybody who's worth their salt knows that you have to go with them. There was a very famous French provider that went up in flames about a year ago. I forget the name. Possibly you remember that in the news. They had an enormous fire and lots of companies just lost their business because a whole availability zone just went up in smoke. And the bigger the hyperscaler, the less chance of you getting done for something like that is. Interestingly, you mentioned IBM. No one ever got fired for IBM. IBM actually recently bought a company that helps to optimize your cloud workloads. And looking at the amount of CPU and RAM they need, will do the heterogeneous scaling part. So making sure you've got the right number of nodes and that the size of the pod scales. But on top of that, we'll actually go back and see if there's a spike or a slowdown that's being caused by a particular microservice. It can go back and change the declarative text to say that this particular container should have more memory and more RAM. You've actually configured it wrong, and goes even one step further and will actually put in a CI/CD request to push that back into the cloud. So I listened to one of your episodes previously and someone was like, we need a tool that does the magic pull request. Well, good news is there is a company that does that, and IBM bought it recently because it was so cool they couldn't not own it. It's a very interesting ecosphere that we're in at the moment where the CI/CD pipelines are going to start to optimize themselves with machine learning. But I don't think you'll get fired for using the cloud anyway. Let's put it that way.
One of the things you were talking about earlier was whole system. Are we going to start seeing inside of companies, they move beyond we're going to be in all the clouds, but they get more targeted and it's like, okay, for our web serving of static content, we're going to be using Cloudflare because I've got no egress charges and I get all the goodness of Cloudflare, or at least egress for R2. And for big data, we're going to be using GCP. And for our general workloads, we'll just stick with AWS. And then they have their own, as much as I dislike to say it, they're going to have their own platform that abstracts that all away, because if then in the future they decide Cloudflare goes away and is being replaced with fill in the blank. Do you think that could happen?
I believe so. As what we do as a company at the moment is, and let's talk about what the hyperscalers do. Most of the time, they don't have the best of breed. They have a breed. So if you want to take a SaaS solution for your logging, it's not the best from AWS. You're looking at CoreLogix, you're looking at Logs.io, you're looking at something else. And it works like that across most of the things that you can abstract out. And if you're looking at someone's infrastructure, you can build out a map and say, we can save you money on your CDN. We can save you money on your logging solution. We can save you money on your block storage. We can save you money on your backup and DR, and you can overlay it with a web. Now, can that web be automated? And can you then get a platform that is kind of like an app store? I totally believe that's possible. It would take all of the other third-party players to come together to build a tool that could scan your infrastructure, find all the things that could be cheaper somewhere else, and then spit out what third-party provider would do a better job for you. I can only imagine how aggressive AWS or Google or Microsoft would be to such a platform, but I totally believe it's possible and something we'll probably see in the future.
Magic handwave. We're 5 years ahead of where we are now, so 2027. What does FinOps look like then?
I don't think FinOps will be a topic in the future. I think it's something that will become so ubiquitous to platforms everywhere that it will just be assumed that it's optimized now. If you look back in the past, there were certain IT problems that we had to solve. I show my dinosaur age. If I'm talking about Windows laptops, you had to configure request space so that if you plugged in too many devices at once, they couldn't have the interrupt request space wasn't enough. USB came along and then you can have thousands of devices and all those things disappeared. I think platforms it'll be so inherent that they are cost optimized that it just won't be a topic of conversation.
What we're not seeing yet, and I'm 100% sure that we are going to see much more, is competition. It sounds that we have competition, which is Azure, Google, and AWS, but I think we're still not there, right? I somehow think that 5 years from now, the FinOps will be not that much FinOps, but hey, something equivalent to Cloudflare just appeared. Hence, our prices need to be reasonable for that something, right? I strongly believe that we are still very early in that part of the industry. There are no real alternatives. Like you mentioned, we spoke and mentioned Linode. I don't think that Linode is a real alternative yet. Linode itself might never be. We are missing that expansion of the services.
I think Linode is pretty close. Linode is probably one of the closest ones. They support 4 of the main database types. And thankfully that we've now cut, the world has decided that Kubernetes is the way forward. All the other guys have to do is provide a Kubernetes-based platform and a storage. Once you've got your compute layer sorted and you've got your storage layer sorted, we're getting to the point where Linode is possibly an option, but they're just playing catch up at the moment. And I think you're right. They're not a true alternative, but for little subsections of the application. As time goes on, Amazon are going to lose their unique value prop for most platforms. It will just become standardized. They'll always be ahead in loads of other crazy things like SageMaker that most people don't use, or some machine learning thing here, or blah, 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 blah. The breadth of services they provide is always going to be more. But for most people, the simples will be taken care of. I mean, if you talk about computing where it was maybe 5-6 years ago, people talked about the LAMP stack. If you were running on a LAMP stack, you could easily run that in Linode right now. And I think we're at the edge of that at the moment where things are standardizing out now. Kubernetes has been proven. That's the one. Probably not going to change now. Database technologies, there's a few strong database technologies that are not going to change now. And as you get less addicted to the ease of configuration and joining things together in AWS, the more available those little platforms will be. And Terraform's helping with that. Infrastructure as code is helping with that. And you're getting platforms that are sitting on top of those that are helping write that for you as well. You'll very likely get in the future, here's my infrastructure as code that runs in Amazon. Is it compatible with Linode? And you'll be able to scan it and it will say, yes, 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 no, 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 no. But yeah, at the moment, I think you are correct that there isn't a real alternative if you want to be serious.
To correct myself, I think actually the real problem is not even that much in alternative, but more in the question that starts with what if. In my experience, companies, hey, yes, everything that I need is really, or 90% what I need is in Linode because I need the Kubernetes cluster, I need storage, I need the database, and a few other things. But then somebody comes to that meeting and say, what if one day, we don't know when, and we don't know what, but what if we need something one day, so hence we need to be in AWS because that's something which is something I don't know what it is, nor when I will need it, is available over there.
You're always going to get it. I mean, even when you talk about the reliability of AWS, 7 nines reliability, someone's always, and what if a comet comes from outer space and smashes into the side of, the island region of AWS? And you're like, guys, if that happens, we have bigger worries than the data's gone. The planet's just been hit by a comet. Let's not worry about that. That mindset should escalate out towards those kind of those arguments. Like, what if some very strange thing happens in the future? Like, okay, let's just deal with the very strange thing when it comes in the future. Let's not spend all our time worrying about it now. The flip side of a lot of those conversations, and I sort of believe this is it's a mindset thing more than a technological thing. Most people, developers and the like, don't want to work on Linode because it's or DigitalOcean, not to pick on the node for some reason, but they don't want to work in these environments because they're just not sexy. And if you always want to be upping your skills and making yourself more more employable to the next employer or this or that, if you have your on your CV, I'm a Linode expert. That's
nobody ever put that on a CV.
There we go. So sometimes I think those arguments aren't necessarily about what if in the future. It's more like, I don't want to do that. It's like the mechanic would rather work on a Rolls Royce than a Mini or something. It's no comparison.
Keeping the full story there, since Linode was purchased by Akamai, I think out of all the list, they're going to be the ones to get forward, not because of them, but because of the Akamai platform that's been there for decades now. As we're wrapping up, all of Ganesh's information is going to be down in the show notes. But Ganesh, if people wanted to get in touch with you directly, what's the best way to do that?
So I'm Ganesh at globaldots.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Full name is Ganesh The Awesome. I think there's only one Ganesh The Awesome on LinkedIn, so you shouldn't have trouble finding me.
Ganesh, thanks for being with us today.
Great. Thanks, guys.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.